So I think he's going to end up winning Arizona. But it won't matter if he ends up losing Pennsylvania and or Georgia. And Georgia, his margin of victory on Election Day has now been slashed to about 3,000 votes, with still a significant number of votes that are coming in from Atlanta. Now, the question is, the legitimacy of those votes. And, we're looking at the count rather than asking the question on whether all those absentees that were turned in compliance with state law, whether the signature verification was done or what have you. But the significance of the signature verification is to prove that the votes actually being delivered are cast by voters who had the legal authority to cast a vote. And without the signature verification process being done publicly and openly, as we saw in Detroit, for example, up in Michigan, where they actually boarded up the windows that would allow people to look at what was going on in the Wayne County canvassing of these absentee votes, then you have no legitimacy to the results of the election because both parties weren't there present to determine whether, in fact, the vote that was being separated from the envelope was actually a legally cast vote. And the statistical anomalies that we're seeing in large port in Detroit and over in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and in Philadelphia and in Atlanta really suggest that what we're witnessing was, let's wait to see how much Trump wins on Election Day, and then make sure we have enough ballots thrown in with absentees to overcome that lead that he accumulated on Election Day. And that's deeply troubling. And you would think that if the Biden camp really thought they won this election fairly and squarely, they would be out front asking for sunshine, for transparency in the process. And yet we see instead is Republican observers being blocked from actually accessing the administrative process for determining which of these votes are valid or not.
Professor, as you know, Fox News called Arizona real early, I think the first major network to do so for Joe Biden. If it flips back to Trump and Trump ends up winning that state, looking back at it, did their early call affect anything?
Well, it certainly reflected the morality of the question and the determination. And if if President Trump holds Pennsylvania and Georgia, then Arizona was the decisive vote for Biden. And if they called it trying to end the inquiry early, and Trump ends up holding that and winning the election, that's just an unbelievable egg on the face. And why they called it so early when most of the other networks, anti-Trump networks, I should add, have retracted any early calls on Arizona once they actually looked at the numbers and where the uncounted votes yet were still to come in heavily Trump territory. I think it's significant. I don't quite understand the early call by Fox News on that.
Professor, if it turns out that Joe Biden ends up with 270 or more electoral votes, based on what you know right now, will you feel comfortable that America legitimately elected Joe Biden?
I don't, but I will say this. I think the Trump team is willing to press long-standing evidences of fraud. So we've known for years that dead people vote in Chicago. I mean, the old joke about the political scientist at Harvard who left in his will that he wanted to be buried in Chicago and said, "Why did you do that?" "So that I can continue to be active in politics." Those kind of long-standing frauds that have been going on for so long that people somehow feel entitled to them, I think the Trump team is going to be willing to push back on that. The pervasive fraud in nursing homes, the people who are incapable of even asking for an absentee ballot, having their votes cast for them, that's fraud. It's illegal under both state law and federal law, and yet it's been going on pervasively for decades. I think the Trump team is willing to push back on that, and maybe we will finally expose some of the long-standing frauds that have been going on as we try and resolve this particular election.